Because everyone does obviously change in a degree of like the environment that they're in.
They don't get drunk in the States, but they go abroad, and it was all you can eat. It was all inclusive.
Right, exactly.
Whoa. What's up, fam? Welcome back to our channel. My name is Tim. This is my beautiful wife, Pauline, and you're tuning in to another episode of the W Podcast, where you get wisdom in the word with the
Wheelers.
Hey, so we are super excited for another episode this week, and this is one that I've been the most excited about in a while. I haven't been, because I feel like it's a really fresh way to talk about something that we've talked about before, but never in this angle. And of course, like everything else this year, low key.
Oh gosh.
The Threadster herself, Pauline Wheeler, had another great. I feel like a lot of people resonated with it.
Why?
And it essentially, how many is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Essentially, is 6 moods that you want to see your partner in before you get married. Like, you want to see them
before you decide to marry them.
Before you decide to marry them.
Before you get engaged, essentially.
Whatever, same thing.
It's not the same thing. Getting married and getting engaged.
So what inspired that?
I really don't remember. It was a while ago. I'll be honest with you.
Early remember. March, that is fair. So let's just get into it then.
Yes.
So the first one you put, but let me just say this first.
Okay.
Everything that we say on this list is not going to be positive necessarily. Like, every mood is not positive. You can be happy, you can be sad, you get that. But in every mood, you can still glorify God. And we can break that down. But that's what we hope, no matter what you get from this, is for yourself. Every mood that I'm in, how can I make sure I'm glorifying God with it? And then when I'm evaluating somebody else, how do I see, okay, is the way they're responding someone that looks like they're trying to surrender their life and have surrendered their life to the Lord? Because obviously that's important, because we don't want to marry somebody, if we're Christians and we surrender our life to the Lord, we don't want to marry somebody who isn't, because that's going to cause a lot of tension. Because when God says stop, to them, that's not a red light, that's a yellow. And it's not a yellow slow down, it's a yellow I got to speed up to make sure I hit it before the red really come. So we don't want that. We got to be careful. I know some of y'all related to that. Y'all like, look, yellow don't mean slow down to me. You got something to say?
Nope.
So let's get into this. The first mood that you really want to see in somebody is, and these are not in order, so let's just get that clear, unless it is, because you wrote it, so you tell me, but I don't think it's in order, is excited.
Yeah.
Why should you see somebody excited? What does that mean? Because obviously you can be happy about, this food is good. Like, what do you mean by
that's
excited?
That's important. I mean, it's important to be excited about food. Food's good.
Important.
What does it mean to be excited? I think it really breaks down to something that the person is looking forward to, because obviously excitement for me looks different for you. And different.
Wait, this is kind of off topic, but it's not. Sit there a little bit, because I feel like sometimes maybe that may be hard for some women.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it goes for guys too, because if someone's, how I'm more extroverted, you're a little bit more on the chill side, and I feel like every couple breaks down in that way. Similarly, obviously, one person's going to be a little bit more energetic than the other, and that's okay. You need that. You don't want somebody who's exactly like you. Everything
we talk about today, we're not saying look to see if they respond the same way you respond.
Right. But I think that's what the difference is. And like a lot of these, it's kind of like, this list is kind of like, not to trick you, but to help you look at things in a different way. Because I think it'd be very easy when you're dating someone to say, oh, okay, yeah, they love God and their morals are right and their character is right. And we agree on a lot of the things that we want out of life. But like, I want to do this in this way. I want to go on vacation. I want to pursue God in this way, but they do it differently. Like, that annoys me. And sometimes it can be a distraction. Like, the how is not more important than the what and the who. And the who is ultimately Jesus, of like who the person's living for, how they make their decisions, who they make their decisions with. But the how is going to change, because let's be honest, if you've been a believer for a certain amount of time, really anything longer than like a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 12 years, how you pursue God looks differently. So for me, how I pursue God looks different as a mom than it did before I became a mom. Now, that doesn't mean, in the sense that like it's less important or more important, or my heart for the Lord has not changed, and like his my priorities and like where he is on my priority list has not changed, but how I pursue him looks different. I think that is true for everyone. Like sometimes depending on the type of job you have, the way your friendships look different, where you live, all those different things. But like who you are in your core and what you want out of life is the same. So a lot of times that shows up, when we're dating, in the sense of, I being a foodie is really important to me. I want to date somebody who's also a foodie and likes to go to different restaurants and try out different foods. And like, that's great and that's fine. You may meet somebody and they say on their dating profile, I'm a foodie. And you're like, oh, this is exciting. They love God. They're a foodie. Like, this could really work. But maybe they like dives and like, drive-in types of places and like kind of hole-in-the-wall mom and pop. But you're more like Instagram, aesthetic, that type of thing. And it's like, oh, and they take you on a date and you're like, we don't foodie the same. You know what I'm saying? And like, that's obviously I'm using a very trivial like example of that. But obviously that translates to every single area of life, the way, you may find somebody who's also passionate about fitness or whatever. So all that to say, that plays into what people think. Like when someone says like, oh yeah, I get excited about, God, and it's like, okay, I get excited about reading my Bible. Well, what does that mean for you? It's going to look different than how you are excited. So we want you to really be more open to like what excitement looks like. Because some people who are more reserved, excitement to them is literally a smile. Versus somebody like me, excitement's like getting loud and jumping and dancing and talking a lot about whatever I'm excited about. And it's like overwhelming for some people sometimes.
Now, I'd like what you said about being open, because I do think in most cases people need to be more open in dating. And because sometimes like it's not really that big a deal depending on what it is. And you could be missing out on a great person that they're great in a lot of other ways, but maybe there's one way you don't love. But I will say, you do be careful being too open, in the sense that if something is really like, I really need somebody to be like this, and you're just not going to be able to get past it, even if you're wrong, if you're not going to be able to get past it, just don't even move forward with them, because you're just going to set yourself up and you're going to set them up for a miserable relationship. So if you're someone who's like, I do not want to step foot in a dive, that does not interest me, you're not a bad person for that. Right. And that just lets you know, hey, this isn't going to work. But if you're not that strong on it, maybe dives is not something you would necessarily go to on your own. But if you're open to doing it with this person, then you should still be open in that way. So it's more of like, I don't hate it, I'm open to trying it. Like Pauline likes plays and recitals and all the other words that go with that.
All the other words.
I would never go to that on my own. But I would go with her.
And have a great time.
I would try my best. Say, no, we could always have fun. So that's what we mean by that. And one thing I thought about when it comes to excited is, does all their logic go out the window when they're excited? So that's something you want to be mindful of too. Like if somebody's excited, do they just forget everything and just dive head first? They don't care about their long-term future when they're swiping their card or when they're running and just about to hurt themselves. Like, what are they like when they're excited? Because that's important too, because obviously that's not going to be the only time they're excited. When you get married, there's going to be a lot of things that excite them. And can they still be somewhat level-headed?
That's good, because even thinking about like going on vacation and like, are you the same person, or do you lose your mind and like you're acting different in different environments? And I'm not saying you should go on vacation with them, but I mean more of like, if you're doing recaps or just talking, or you're in certain environments, it's like, okay, like, yeah, you're still the same. Because everyone does obviously change in a degree of like the environment that they're in.
They don't get drunk in the States, but they go abroad, and it was all you can eat. It was all inclusive.
Right, exactly. Whoa. That's a really good thing, because if you're only used to seeing them at church or at work or on these kind of very even keel environments where they are frequenting all the time and they're not necessarily excited because it's business as usual, but yeah, being able to see them be able to navigate very, what do you call it? Not extreme, but just like heightened emotions. Yeah,
it's not everyday emotions.
Yeah.
So the second thing was disappointed. You want to see them when they're in a disappointed mood. Why is that important?
because disappointments are very real, and they're going to be, the first two are kind of hitting, like, when you make your wedding vows, for better or for worse, like the excited is for better, and the disappointed, I guess they all kind of flow in that way, and like can fall into worse. And we were talking about this recently with somebody that we love about, how it is very wise, if you are able to, and if it's what God's will is for you, to be able to date for a year, because a lot of times you can see a lot of different literal seasons of the weather with somebody, but then also just seasons of their life. That, if you give it a year, you're good chance you're going to see them go through something high and something low during that time, and how they respond. And obviously disappointment would be a low. And kind of the same thing, like, does all logic and all character and all values go out the window when they're disappointed? If they've lost their job, how do they act? If a friend offends them, how are they responding? If they're not meeting their goals the way that they want to, at the pace that they wanted to, how are they dealing with that? Are they acting irrational and angry and mean and things like that? Are they able to really seek the Lord for wisdom and perspective? Are they able to step back and say, hey, I really don't like how this is going, but I know that God's not done? Are they allowing it to bring them closer to God, and are they able to kind of step out of themselves and see the bigger picture? Or are they very wrapped up in the scenario and not really able to get past it? Because 100% you guys are going to go through disappointments in marriage. And I saw this quote on Threads a while ago that it was saying, and I probably mentioned it on one of the podcasts recently because it was so good, and it was I'll mention it again for the people listening for the first time, but the quote is, marriage isn't hard, life is hard, don't take it out on each other. And I feel like that is so true, because by the time you're married, chances are you've done a lot of work or vetting, or you hope, as to who the person you've chosen to marry, and everyone's so happy on their wedding day. And it's like, what's the difference? You always say this, between the people who stay in their marriage 40, 50 years, 60 years, till death do them part, or the people who decide to call it quits. I know that it's not an easy black and white answer, but all that to say is, everybody starts on the high on their wedding day, and everybody from there, it starts to go downhill or uphill and downhill, and we all just go through the ebbs and flows of that. So all that to say, a lot of times it's not within the marriage that the problems are happening. Obviously that does happen too, but a lot of times it's wow, this job loss really hit this person really hard, and they hit a depression and were not able to come out of it. They started treating their spouse badly, and it was just this back and forth, this volleying of treating each other badly as a result of this one depressing, or a series of depressing scenarios over years. So that's why it's important to kind of notice that when you are in the dating phase of how do they deal with disappointment. And I know that was very key for us. We had some disappointments in our dating time that was kind of a test for us, and was how are we going to deal with this? And recognizing that it is a test, we are going to get through this, but we got to make sure that we don't make things worse just because we're feeling disappointed. Yeah,
something else you want to look at in yourself, and then obviously in them, is how do they talk to themselves when they get disappointed? There was a quote from Kevin Durant a couple years ago, who's a basketball player, if you don't know. And he was he's really good, by the way, but he was talking about what he does in the summer as far as practicing and shooting a lot of jump shots and working on his game. And he said that when he would miss a shot, he would just start kirking on himself and really saying a lot of mean things to himself, how could you do this? Obviously way worse than that. And he said he eventually stopped doing that because he was I don't like talking to myself like this. Why would I talk to myself like this? And a lot of times we say things to ourselves that we would never say to others, or allow others to say to us. So that's just something to be mindful of yourself. How are you talking to yourself? Because the Bible says, love your neighbor as you love yourself. So if you're not loving yourself well, you're not going to be able to love them that well. And then the other thing is, our pastor told us this years ago, and you probably remember it.
I do.
But he said a sign of maturity, and that's one of the things we want you to evaluate with everything on this list, because everybody experiences all of these moods, but we're looking for their maturity within the moods, because that has a big deal and impact on the marriage, because we're all going to experience the same thing. How do we navigate it? That's what separates people who last and don't last when it comes to anything, but obviously marriage. And how long, this is what he said, how long does it take to get over disappointment? That's a sign of maturity. Does it take you a week when you get bad news to be able to get back in your word, to be able to get back in community, to be able to get back into a right headspace? Or does it take 24 hours? Does it take 2 hours? How long does it take you to get back into your normal state after you've been disappointed? That's a real test of spiritual maturity and just emotional maturity for sure.
Yeah.
So the third thing is hopeful. You want to see them in a hopeful mood. Yeah. Why did you choose that word?
And this is actually perfect to come after disappointed because if you are in a great season of life, you may not really need hope. Like if you're like, hey, my prayers are being answered, like the Lord is good, and you're in a season of like praise and rejoicing, and that's amazing. But I've also found that like as I've grown as an adult, like there's never a time, or there hasn't been a time in my life, I don't know if I'm the only one, let me know if I'm not, where like some things are good, or like there are a lot of things good, but there's also a lot of things that are I would like to change.
Not everything's at a 10 at
right,
the same
exactly.
time.
You're not juggling all your balls, at the same time. There all are balls dropping, and that's okay. But all that to say, whatever areas of your life are not, or their life that are not where they want them to be, and if they're highly ambitious, it's going to be probably every area. But can they be hopeful? Or is it kind of like what you were saying with Kevin Durant about like, there's just a lot of negativity. There's a lot of doom and gloom. Why is God letting this happen to me? How could I be so dumb to do this to myself? Like, how could they do this to me? Those types of, thoughts and conversations, if those are coming up. Or is it like, through the disappointment, hey, I am really hurt. Because there you have the honesty. Because you want someone who's honest. And God wants us to be honest with him. I'm really sad that this happened. I'm really angry that this happened. But you're always looking for the but. But I know God's not done. But I know that I can make it better.
All things
but I know
together.
that this is not the end. I'm disappointed that I got fired. But what if God has something more for me? You always want to hear that hope because, the Bible tells us that hope is an anchor for our soul. And you are...
Give them the Bible!
You are going to go through hard times. I mean, this is 2025 when we're recording this video or this podcast episode. And... chances are really good if you're watching this, you have lived through a pandemic, and we've all felt really, really hard things during that time. And that was honestly the time for us as Christians to be the light that the Lord calls us to be in the world. So many people were experiencing so much loss, job loss, family members, health, homes, like all the things. So many things were being lost during that time. And it was really just like an highlighter or like a microcosm or a dramatic emphasis on like what goes on every single day and every single year. It just was like, at a very large concentrated time of the world and happening to a large amount of people that maybe weren't normally experiencing it at that volume. But all that to say, it was really important for us as Christians during that time to infuse the hope that we receive from the Lord. That the Bible says that though Christ endured the cross, he looked beyond. I'm butchering this verse right now, but what does it say? For the hope,
for the joy set before
Thank you.
him.
For the joy. Well, I'm not really talking about joy right now. I'm talking about hope. But yeah, it's kind of the same thing. But the Lord was able to have joy because he looked beyond the cross that he was enduring, which was literally the worst death in the history of the world, and will always be that way. But it's like, can you go through this really hard time and see hope beyond it? And I'm not saying if you suffer from depression that you're not godly or that you're not a good candidate to be married or anything like that. I do know that you can experience depression and Jesus at the same time. Like, it's possible. The depression does not have to have final word over your life. But yeah, it's really important for you to be able to like see the silver lining in things. And I'm not saying like the second you get laid off, you're like, all right, like God has something better for me. Like, no, grieve, go through your process. Like you had mentioned with timelines, like I'm not saying if they're not hopeful right away that they're not a good candidate or you're not a good candidate.
We say this a lot. We're not saying that somebody needs to be perfect in every single one of these because you're not. But they should want to be the best that they can be.
Right. And I think it goes back to like the timeline that we briefly mentioned earlier of like, it's really great that if you can date for a year, because if you've dated someone for a whole year and you've never seen them be hopeful, then I think that's what the problem is. And because you might be listening to this list or this podcast, hearing this list and thinking like, oh, okay, like this is confirmation that like I am with the right person or I am doing a good job. And I hope that that's how you feel. I hope that you do feel encouraged, because it can feel very like, oh, well, they don't have this, they don't have that salary, they don't have this, material thing, or they're too short, they're too tall, whatever, that they're not a good option for me. And it's like, no, if they have these things, like these are the things that are going to get you through hard times in life and in marriage.
Yeah. So number 4, because I don't have nothing to add, you hit it. And I'll start with this one, is being angry. You want to see them in an angry mood. And you will see them in an angry mood if they're telling you the truth.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times in dating, first couple months, everybody trying to be on their P's and Q's. Everybody trying to be nice. You trying to feel it out. But eventually, if you date long enough, you're going to see them in an angry mood. And when you do, how do they respond to that? Because the Bible doesn't say it's a sin to be angry. It actually says be angry, but do not sin in your anger. Yeah. And it says because anger gives a foothold to the devil. So you just want to be mindful of that. Like when they get angry, do they curse you out? Mm-hmm. Do they bring up your past when it was a conversation that y'all settled a while ago, but they're bringing it back up now that you said something that annoys them or makes them angry? Like you want to watch their attitudes, because this is really important. I remember my dad told me when he was getting married, it was really important to him to find somebody that he could argue well with, because he knew that if you're in a relationship and you don't know how to argue well, it's only going to lead to your demise. It reminds me of the verse that talks about how can a country be together? How can it stay strong if there's division? How can a house
divide against itself will not stand? Yeah.
Say it again, because you kind of mumbled it. Say it so they get it.
A house divided against itself will not stand. I mean, and even the verses in the New Testament that talk about, like the Pharisees saying Jesus is from the devil, from the enemy, because he's casting out demons. And Jesus said, like, how can I cast this out if it's of me? Like, you cannot beat yourself. You cannot cast yourself out. You cannot be divided against your own self. And that's what, why the Bible talks about marriage, the two shall become one, and you're constantly working to stay one, because that's what the enemy wants, is division. That's what the core of the word divorce is, division, is dividing. It's two that are one, separating. That's why it's so painful. And there's so much, death within divorce, because that's what it is.
Yeah, and there's a verse, Proverbs 27:4, that says, an angry person is dangerous. That's one of the versions says it like that. Another version says anger is cruel, wrath is like a flood, but jealousy is even more dangerous. So you just really want to be mindful of being with somebody who doesn't know how to regulate their emotions. If you know your Bible and you know how Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt, but he didn't make it to the promised land, there's some theologians who argue that the reason he did not make it to the promised land was because he didn't learn how to control his anger. Yeah. Because when the Lord told him to speak to the rock, he was angry at the Israelites and hid it. Mm-hmm. So depending on how you want to view that verse, you could see that, okay, maybe that did have something to do with it. Obviously, we know his anger is what caused him to kill somebody before he even became the Moses that came to save the Israelites, that caused him to flee from Egypt the first time. So you just want to be mindful of that. Is how do you respond to anger? How do you allow anger to control you? Do you let it control you? Yeah. Because we only want the Holy Spirit to be controlling us, if we're being honest.
Yeah, I think that's really good, because I think in culture, we're kind of taught, especially as women, to stay away from guys and people that are angry. And I don't think that that's totally fair and accurate, or good advice, I should say, because all of us experience anger. It's just a matter of how you express it is differently, and it's very different between the two genders. And a lot of guys get like this kind of persona or this image that like, oh, guys are not emotional, they don't cry or whatever, and we all know that's not true. Guys cry and they have, you know, emotions, but and obviously anger is an emotion. So if a guy is angry, that's him, you know, experiencing an emotion. But I think that a lot of times we're just so afraid, and like, don't get me wrong, abuse is never okay. Hitting a person, whether you're a man or a woman, is never okay. Especially in, you know, like a domestic, you know, romantic relationship. Like, I'm never condoning that at all. And that's the extreme version of anger mismanagement or anger not being controlled. And we don't want that, because the Bible tells us to, you know, the fruit of the Spirit is self-control. So you need to always be able to control your body, whether you're sad, whether you're angry, all those things. But I think for as women, it all depends on, you know, like how you grew up and what you have seen, and like, you know, different triggers that we're all working out. If you are just like, oh, a guy's angry, I saw like a glimpse of him being angry, like, I'm done, like, I cannot. I think that you have to kind of slow down and ask yourself first, well, you know, what do you do when you're angry? Because a lot of us women cuss people out when we're angry. We are putting our finger in people's faces when we're angry. We're not controlling ourselves, but because we're a woman, it feels more warranted, because a lot of us women have anger issues, and like, it stems from bitterness, it stems from rejection, it stems from a lot of things, and it's not acceptable between either of the two genders to kind of act out in your anger. And I think that we just have to be able to recognize our own triggers and manage our own anger first, and not just say, oh, anger is just a man hitting a wall, punching a wall, or things like that. Like, yeah, those are signs that are concerning as well. But a lot of times, like, I know with you, not that you get angry a lot, because I don't think that you do, but like, you do a good job of controlling whatever anger you have. Where it's like, hey, I need a second, I'm gonna walk away, you know. And it's not even that you're angry at me. A lot of times it's just like something happened, like outside of our marriage, outside of our family, where you're like, all right, this makes me angry.
I'll tell you, we need to stop the conversation, because it's like, if I am in that space,
right? Because you'll say, I don't want to get angry, I don't want to be expressing anger in that way. Like, this is, I could see myself, you know. And that's the thing is, like, you might be at here, but it's like, what's your boiling point? And like, you got to be able to have boundaries with your own emotions. We talk about boundaries all the time.
And if you're dating somebody and you guys are getting into a kind of a heated conversation, and they ask you, hey, I need to stop talking about this. That. Like, please respect that. Yeah. Don't keep pushing them, because then you're pushing them, and it could cause them to blow up in a way that nobody wants.
Right.
Now, you'll have to build up to this place in a relationship where you can trust. Pauline always will trust that if I say I don't want to talk about this right now, that doesn't mean I don't want to talk about it ever.
Right.
It means I will revisit it. And I think that's important. If you're somebody who needs to have pauses sometimes in conversations, you need to make sure that it's not the end, it's just a pause, a break, and you're going to come back to the conversation, because that's going to break trust if you constantly push somebody off and don't want to discuss something that may be important to them.
Right, I love that. And that's why, like, this point was really important, the angry point, the number 4, because I feel like a lot of people would see this and be triggered, like, oh, I don't want to be with somebody who's angry. Like, if you get angry at all, like, I'm done. And it's like, that's not fair, because we cannot control what emotions we experience, but we can control how we manage them. So this applies, of course, with all the other emotions we mentioned before, the moods we mentioned. But it applies also with, you know, positive ones as well. Like, just because you're excited doesn't mean you get to bulldoze the entire conversation the entire day. That doesn't mean that you know, if you're upset that they're not as excited as you are, and now that turns into anger or frustration or whatever. Like, this is all, if you can see every single emotional spectrum, which there's, you know, a lot of them out there, that's obviously ideal, not realistic in a dating time frame, but like, these major ones will help you get an idea. Okay, if he can handle disappointment well, like, I have a good sense that he can handle depression well as well, and so on and so forth, or excitement and joy and all that.
Yeah. So number 5 is offended. And you had because I asked you before we recorded, like, what's the difference between being angry and offended? Because somebody may say, like, that's kind of the same thing. And I felt like you had a really good response to that.
Yeah, to me, and I'm obviously, I don't know what, like, the Webster, difference would be.
I am Webster.
What's that from?
I just said.
Okay.
I don't know.
I'm not saying I'm Webster. I'm just saying this is my interpretation of it. And if you have anything different, like, please share with us in the comments. But to me, anger is more like outwards, and it's more anger can be disassociated with your personal self. So you can feel anger when you're watching the news, when you see somebody getting mistreated badly that is not like a personal friend or a personal connection to you. That can make you angry. When you're reading stories or hearing stories about things, you can be angry at yourself for a mistake that you made, or a decision that you made, or an opportunity you feel like you missed out on. But I feel like offense is more and solely completely personal, and it's more of like an attack on your character, or it seems that way when you're more thinking, well, how could you think that about me? How could you do that to me? I would understand you doing it to somebody else, but how could you do it to me? So I think it's more of like, it's personal. Someone's in your home, in your proverbial home, or your house, or your in your yard, more to say, than it is like, oh, well, if that happened to somebody else, like, sucks for them, but as long as it doesn't happen to me, I'm good.
Yeah, and how this could show up differently from anger when it comes to seeing how somebody responds is sometimes when somebody's offended, maybe they can become more rude or condescending or
defensive,
snarky, and their comments are short. Like, that's something you want to look for when you are communicating with somebody and you feel like they get offended. How are they speaking to you or to anyone else that may have offended them? That's important as well. And then also, how quickly can they forgive? Because the Bible and the Lord commands us to forgive other people. And when we are offended, sometimes we can feel justified in our offense, and we can be like, I should be offended. Mm-hmm. And it's like, that ain't biblical. Like, sure, you can feel that way, but how do you respond? Like, you have to, and it goes back to how quickly can you get over offense. That's a sign of spiritual maturity as well. Mm-hmm. So the last thing, number 6, this one may make you laugh. And this one, to be fair, you did not have in your original thread.
I did not.
Somebody added it, and I just thought, yo, this is gold. Like, this has to be in the list.
Yeah.
Number 6 of all the moods that you should see somebody in was hungry.
Yeah.
Or should we say hangry?
Yeah. I think this is really good because I think she meant it as a joke. So whoever you are, I don't remember your name, but thank you for the suggestion. But it's real. I do think that you should see somebody, like, hungry.
That's serious, because people can get nasty when they're hungry.
Right, but also
Snickers got a whole commercial.
Let's take it deeper, though, because you can be hungry in the sense of, yes, food, but also, are they fasting? What do they look like when they're fasting? And, are they talking about it? Are they complaining about it? Do you even know they're fasting? Are they able to kind of suffer, from hunger in that way with the Lord well? But also, let's talk about another type of physical hunger, which is sexual hunger.
My body, huh?
Yeah, and this, you guys already know, we're always going to talk about boundaries.
This has been another episode of W. Gotta go. Oh, I thought you were saying I'm hungry. My bad. Go ahead.
Whew, that was real bad, Michael Jackson.
Woo!
Yeah, being able to see them hungry, like sexually hungry, like are they abstinent? Are they abstaining from sex? Are they abstaining from all the kinds of sex? Or is it like, hey, I know we're not doing this, but can we do that? Because oh my God, you're going in right now. What is going on?
Let's do the podcast.
Yeah, let's do the podcast. Join me, please. But then also the other side of that is like spiritual hunger. Like, have you seen them in a season, in a time where they feel like God is not answering them the way that they want him to, where they feel like God is far from them? Obviously, we know theologically God is never far from us. But if you've been around for a while and you love Jesus, you've gone through seasons and times of your life where you feel like God is far. Like, that's just straight up. Like, let's keep it real here on the W podcast. Like, that doesn't mean that you're not reading your word and you're not pursuing God and you're not doing the things that the spiritual practices and habits to feel close to God yourself. But you're not being honest with me if you're going to sit here and tell me, Pauline, every single time I pray and I worship, and I seek God, like, he meets me every single time, and he answers me every single time I call him. That's just not true, because a lot of times the Lord will speak to us through silence. And there are seasons of our life where you're being tested, and I don't know, this is not biblical, but I've heard this quote before that has helped me a lot in my just perspective of the Lord, of like, you know, it says the teacher is silent during the test. Like, when you are studying and you are talking to the Lord and you're growing in a certain area, yes, a lot of times he'll give you guidance, but then also there comes a time where it's like, hey, you know what to do it. And even if you're not getting the affirmation and the feedback that you want from people or from the Holy Spirit himself, still doing what it is that you know you need to do. There's a poem that I heard in high school that I did not take seriously because I was not seriously pursuing the Lord at that time, and I should have looked up, but it literally just dropped in my heart right now as we're recording, called Footsteps. Have you heard of it?
Do you think I've heard of it?
I don't know.
No.
There's a poem called Footsteps. Let's see if I can pull it up real quick. There's a girl that I danced with in high school who, like, I didn't realize at the time, but she was following Jesus. And she was super nice. And she got this, like, tattooed on her. And I was like, oh, God, like, what is this going to do? But now, after I started pursuing Jesus, seriously, I, like, look back on it and very much, like, appreciate it. And basically it's talking about, it's a poem about how, like, you know, people are walking with God, you're walking with God, and then one day you look down on the sand and you see that there's only like one footstep instead of two sets of footprints, and then you realize, like, people look at it and say, oh, God left me. Look, I was walking by myself. There's only one set of footprints in the sand. But then as they continue to walk and mature with the Lord, they realize, oh, that was God's footsteps carrying me through that hard time. So if you want to look up that poem, you should. It was always helpful to me in the back of my mind. But all that to say, everybody goes through seasons of their life where they're spiritually hungry. And how do they respond? Like, are you only really peaceful and calm, or really peaceful that you want to be when you can see tangible evidence of God in your life, when you're able to say, like, yes, God spoke to me and I'm so encouraged, and like, he told me to do this and I saw the results? Or are you still able to be faithful and be peaceful and calm and joyful, not because you're seeing the results that you want and you're seeing, like, yes, this is God's, you know, God in my life, but you're able to do it even in the valleys. So I think that that's really, really, really important to see that in the person that you're dating, and for them to see that in you.
Yeah. Well said. I'm sure it's a beautiful poem.
Yikes.
And if you need something that's not a poem, just watch a Snickers commercial, and I'm sure you will get what we're saying here. But I hope you enjoyed this episode. We don't want you to set yourself up to be surprised in marriage because you didn't complete the full process of getting to know somebody and dating. The more conversations you have, the more environments you can see somebody in, the better the evaluation you'll be able to have. Mm-hmm. So this is just a start to get you started. Now go and implement what we showed you, and we'll see you next week on the W Podcast.
Bye.
Thanks for watching this video.
To get more Christian relationship advice, subscribe to our channel.
And make sure you check out our other videos as well.